This is the Arctic Ocean, the smallest ocean in the world, and one of the harshest and most mysterious places on the entire planet. While small by ocean standards, the Arctic is still truly massive, and its waters account for a territory that is almost the same size as all of Russia, and about 1.5 times the size of the United States, with an estimated $35 trillion worth of untapped oil and gas resources trapped beneath its ice, and an additional $2 trillion worth of untapped rare earth minerals on the relatively shallow ocean floor. To put things in perspective, that's enough untapped market capital to create several separate new companies, all the size of Apple, which is currently the world's largest company. And let's just say that this sheer size and untapped potential has gotten the Arctic more than a little geopolitical attention in recent years, especially from the nations that are best poised to exploit it, including the United States, Canada, Denmark, Iceland, Norway, and of course, the Russian Federation. The Arctic is one of the few remaining places on the Earth that hasn't yet been widely exploited by human populations, and in that sense, the Arctic is truly one of a kind. Its only real parallel is, well, the Antarctic, which is the only other place that comes close in terms of potential untapped mineral wealth and unexplored mysteries that could be used to expand geopolitical power. But while they may seem similar on the surface, they are actually, in more ways than one, complete polar opposites. Unlike the Arctic, Antarctica is governed by strict international treaties, which prohibit commercial mining and military activities, and are set up in a way to preserve natural beauty, dissuading individual nations from attempting to control the region, at least for the time being. But in the Arctic, the international treaties that exist are designed with a completely different purpose, not to prevent the exploitation, but to determine which country gets to do it, to decide who gets to profit the most from the region's melting sea ice, and to establish who gets to build the military presence in the area that will allow them to protect that new industry and exert power and influence over the changing global map, making it the only remaining place on the planet still available for imperial-era type power grabs, and leading to a decades-long struggle for conquest that most average people are completely unaware of. Sometimes, this struggle can get downright comical. And under the ice here, you will find many strange things. From Russian nuclear submarines dancing in choreographed sequence, to beluga whales trained as spies and loaded with surveillance equipment, to members of parliament in deep-sea polar exploration vessels, to viruses unknown to modern medical science, frozen in the ice for thousands of years, and leading to fears of the potential development of new, illegal biological weapons. In fact, if you look hard enough under the ice here, you may even find a titanium flag planted on the seabed, over 4,000 meters, or more than 2.5 miles below the surface. A strange souvenir that seems funny at first, but that actually points to the growing tenseness of the situation. That's right, despite the presence of Santa and his elves, it's not all fun and games out here around the North Pole. It's the kind of stuff you would imagine would only be found in a children's cartoon spy novel, but none of these things are made up. They're all part of a series of eccentric, real-life Russian antics, as Russia does literally everything in its power to stake its claim and defend the Arctic from what it considers to be intruders. And Russia's shows of power aren't mere gimmicks, at least not from its perspective. Russia has actually proposed that the Arctic Ocean be renamed to the Russian Ocean, another signal of how seriously they really take this stuff. And as it's tried to stake its claim, the region has become home to a little-known, but very active border dispute between several NATO nations and the Russian Federation. A border dispute that has led to massive military buildups, which have grown into some of the fastest military escalations on the planet, including additions to Russia's most powerful naval fleet, and also including the training of new Russian special forces that specialize in riding Siberian reindeer into combat. And no, we're not making that up. The good news is, as far as we know, they haven't yet been able to harness polar bears, but knowing the ridiculousness of Russian propaganda, those claims might not be far behind. Russia has been very busy in this part of the world, choosing to invest more in new infrastructure here than it's invested in any other part of the country, building at a frantic pace designed to position it to quickly occupy the area and extract the wealth of newly discovered resources and newly unlocked shipping lanes before its competitors can. These improvements have included buffing up its ice-breaking fleet, already the largest in the world, to include more than 40 vessels costing more than $250 million each, along with investing in a new Arctic oil tanker fleet and launching a first-of-its-kind floating nuclear power plant fleet, with nuclear reactor ships designed to move as needed and provide reliable power to remote Arctic cities of up to 100,000 people. To tie it all together, they're even building a $110 billion Arctic megaport, something that requires them to build entire new infrastructure just to reach the site, along with an 870-kilometer pipeline to transport oil to the region, plus new highways, 2 new airports, 15 brand new villages, and several electric plants. Everything that's needed to house an estimated 400,000 workers to service the operation. While all of this infrastructure provides obvious advantages for mineral, oil, and gas extraction, it also provides something that is arguably even more valuable in the long term: the ability to control the bulk of the shipping and trade that passes through the Arctic Ocean. You see, the Arctic Ocean itself is changing very quickly and drastically. In 40 years, it has lost 40% of its sea ice during its seasonal minimum, and the oldest parts of the Arctic ice sheets have declined by a stunning 95% in the same time period, with some estimates claiming that the Arctic could be entirely ice-free during the summer months by as early as 2040. And as this ice melts, it's opening massive ocean shipping routes that humanity has never had access to before. Trade routes that were once considered impassable, but that after opening up will be shorter and come with many other advantages over current alternatives, especially when it comes to trade between Russia and their main trade partners, India and China, and also when it comes to trade between Europe and Asia. The Arctic trade route is up to 40% shorter than current alternatives, cutting up to 9,000 kilometers off a one-way trip. But the shipping here isn't just faster, it's also far more resilient. In current major trade routes, like the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal, small errors can lead to major halts in global shipping, such as when the Ever Given became stuck in the Suez and halted global trade for weeks. But with the breadth and depth of the Arctic, such incidents are impossible. And the depth of the polar trade route also gives it other advantages over shallow canals, such as allowing ships to carry heavier loads that put them deeper in the water. As one example, one of the heaviest trade ships in history recently passed through the Arctic during the brief ice-free summer season, saving them tens of thousands of dollars on fuel costs by allowing them to carry larger loads and reduce their total trips. Combine less needed trips with much shorter shipping routes, and you begin to realize some serious competitive potential. Currently, around 20,000 ships annually pass through the Suez Canal, generating close to $10 billion in annual revenue for Egypt, while only around 1,700 ships enter the Arctic each year. But those numbers are changing before our eyes, and will change drastically in our lifetimes. In 2017, a Russian oil tanker crossed the Arctic without needing an icebreaker for the first time, a monumental change that resulted in an immediate uptick in trade. The following year, traffic in the Arctic increased by 80% to 16 million metric tons, and in 2019, that number increased again to 23 million metric tons. The trends continued, even during extreme sanctions against Russia during the war in Ukraine. Between 2014 and 2022, trade in the Arctic increased by a massive 755%, something which is expected to increase by another tenfold between now and 2035. Wars and melting ice aside, new international trade routes are healthy, and overall a net gain in the long term for the global economy and international cooperation as a whole. But on the flip side, a small taste of this growing power has caused Russia to push things more than a little bit too far. And to ensure it can claim as much of this power as possible, Russia's growth in the region has not by any means been limited to civilian infrastructure. In fact, most of their moves here have been military ones. To protect what it sees as one of its primary strategic regions, Russia has recently established a northern command, formed new Arctic brigades, and equipped Arctic bases with new rockets for coastal defense, alongside specialized anti-aircraft systems designed to perform in the extreme Arctic cold. Russia has also made moves to reignite Cold War-era hostilities in the Arctic, renovating a huge number of formerly abandoned Soviet military bases in the area, and even building 5 new ones, bringing it to a total of 52 bases in the region. This means that Russia now outnumbers NATO in the Arctic by about a third. And unlike most global arenas, due to NATO's relative neglect of the region, and NATO's comparative paucity of winter-trained troops and winter-ready equipment, plus the fact that many Russians have been born and raised in these extreme cold conditions, the Arctic may be the only global arena where Russia potentially has a true strategic advantage. And while this buildup is accelerating quickly, It's hardly something that has happened overnight. The major buildup has been ongoing for more than 17 years, the length of time since Russia's famous, but now largely forgotten mission in 2007 to plant its titanium flag on the seabed of the North Pole, making a very clear statement about their intentions that was largely ignored by the Western world. And Russia's efforts here have especially ramped up since 2014, a year that should sound familiar since it was the year that Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine, something that may be far more connected to Russia's Arctic ambitions than most people realize, which we'll explain shortly. In a somewhat recent public statement about Russia's presence here, which is a little bit outdated and likely understates the current situation, it was noted that Russia currently has at least 45,000 troops stationed in the Arctic, quite a large standing army considering the remote nature of the region, alongside 3,400 military vehicles, 41 ships, 15 submarines, including 8 of Russia's 11 nuclear subs, and 110 aircraft, which Russia has been using to make the most long-range bomber patrols in history since the end of the Cold War, regularly sending nuclear-capable bombers to Alaska, and especially along Canada's Arctic coast, as a warning to the US and Canada not to interfere with Russian claims to the region. The question is, why does Russia feel the need to get so aggressive in the Arctic, especially considering that nobody else has been doing that? And what might it all mean for the future? The answer, as is normally the case with aggression of this type, is that they are trying to make claims to the region that extend beyond what they are actually rightfully entitled to, and are trying to add pressure to those claims with military presence to help them achieve their goals. Russia, Canada, and Denmark have all laid claim to overlapping pieces of the Arctic Ocean, including the North Pole, and Russia wants to show the world that, unlike its competitors, it's ready to fight to defend its stake, and the potentially trillions of dollars of natural resources it unlocks. The way it works is that each nation is allowed to claim the waters of up to 200 miles off its coast as its own territory for rights such as fishing, transport, or mining. After that, waters are open for grabs if you can prove they belong to you, which has a lot to do with proving the extent of your nation's continental shelf, something that is supposed to be a scientific process, not a political one. The problem is that defining who owns the continental shelf is quite tricky in the Arctic, and so the scientific process becomes more murky than we would like, with just enough gray area for cunning politicians seeking power and profit to turn it from a process of scientific observation into a political battle of wills. Russia first made a claim to expand its Arctic shelf in 2001, but its claim was rejected by the UN Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf due to a lack of scientific evidence. Not to be deterred, Russia then waited and filed its claim again when the time was geopolitically right, in 2015, right after the dust had just settled from its annexation of Crimea, a region that, like the Arctic, had also been desired by Russia due in part to its wealth in energy resources and its strategic position on the global map. The timing should not be ignored. In Crimea, Russia had proven that it was willing to defend its competing territorial claims with other nations by using military force, and other nations had proven that they were willing to roll over on their backs and look the other way to appease Russia. As was the case with Germany leading up to World War II, Russia had learned that it could violate international law and claim the territories that rightfully belonged to other nations as their own, and that no one would hold them accountable with any meaningful consequences. And so, when Russia then made their new claims over the Arctic in 2015, and once again in 2021, they were much bolder than the original, to the point of seeming to be intentionally provocative and offensive, with Russia claiming almost 70% of the entire Arctic Ocean, which it had previously said should be renamed the Russian Ocean, while also directly and deliberately competing with claims that had previously been filed by Denmark and Canada, even going so far as to extend their claim all the way up to, and by some interpretations, including, Greenland and Canada's 200-mile coastal limits. This was an action that would effectively box these nations in and prevent them from having any meaningful access to the most mineral-rich parts of the Arctic region. And it was, ironically, the type of progressive border advancement that Russia claims it is upset at NATO for constantly doing, but which in truth, Russia itself has been far more guilty of in recent history. When considered in light of the very public troop buildups that preceded it, this was a move that may have amounted to Russia simply bullying their neighbors, saying, if you won't grant us our scientific claim, we might simply be willing to take everything in the Arctic by force. Russia would gamble that, since these nations had never had access to these Arctic territories before, they wouldn't care enough about them to risk war, and would simply let Russia have them if Russia pushed, which was probably a good gamble. As it happened, the populations of the impacted nations showed that they really couldn't care less about Russia and the Arctic, at least as a whole. The entire thing seemed to amount to a few late-night comedy skits about Russians riding reindeer into battle, or a few inadequate actions in dusty corners of forgotten government offices, and then sort of seemed to sizzle out of the public consciousness, exactly the way that Russia likes things. And if people didn't care about Russia encroaching on their own territorial claims, they weren't at all likely to care about Russia encroaching on the territorial claims of others. So a year after their most recent Arctic claim, Russia seemed satisfied by the apathy of the West about its ambitions, and then proceeded with their full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The lack of response to the situation in the Arctic certainly wasn't the only reason they felt emboldened to invade, but it certainly didn't help either. When it comes to geopolitics, savvy world leaders are always testing and measuring international responses, starting small and then progressively building up until they hit their limit. And if you're weak in one arena, the assumption is that you're probably going to be weak in all arenas. An assumption that, for Russia, has proven to be quite true in NATO's response to its invasion. A response which hasn't been non-existent, but has certainly been inadequate. And so, the geopolitics of the Arctic have become something reminiscent of the geopolitics of the South China Sea, with the same exact types of political tensions, and identical types of provocations over disputed waters. Competing territorial claims over shipping rights lead to aerial patrols and the testing of international willpower, and then, eventually, lead to threats of full-scale invasions. Russia especially cares about the Arctic these days because, with the accession of Finland and probably Sweden into NATO, it has essentially lost its ability to project power in the Baltic Sea, making the Arctic its only remaining defensible access point into international waters. But I've already discussed that at length in a previous video about the current politics surrounding the Baltic and Kaliningrad, so I won't belabor the point here, other than to say that the more power that Russia loses as a result of its actions in Ukraine, the more it will be inclined to push further into the Arctic, and hope that no one stops them. Still, there is also some reason to believe, as usual, that some of Russia's actions here are mostly bluff and bluster. If we go back to that famous titanium flag on the seabed of the North Pole, some believe that flag might not actually be there, but that it was instead just a cheap propaganda scheme. After Russia publicized the event on national TV, it was later discovered by a 13-year-old boy that Russia had used footage from the movie Titanic and attempted to pass it off as footage from its polar expedition. This caused the reality of the entire mission to be called into question, something which is especially ironic considering that the member of Russian parliament who led the expedition compared Russia's deep-sea dive to the United States moon landing. Understand that from the Russian point of view, the Russian government has officially denied the reality of the moon landing in the past, and more than half of Russians still believe the moon landing was staged. Not exactly the sort of thing you want to compare your world-changing polar expedition to if you're a Russian. But whether or not the moon landing was shot in a studio or on the surface of the moon, one thing is for certain. They didn't borrow footage from Hollywood movies and try to pass it off as a real-life event. Only time will tell what actually happens in the Arctic. Until then, check out our other videos, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for future updates on this topic. This episode was made possible by my supporters on Patreon and my YouTube channel members, who continue to make the research and animation in these videos possible. If you enjoy these videos and want to help support more of them, you can learn more by clicking the link in the description, or by clicking the membership tab on my YouTube channel page. Patrons enjoy special benefits, like the ability to suggest video topics and access to previous versions of my videos that I'm not able to post on YouTube. I'm deeply appreciative to all of my awesome patrons. See you on the next one.